Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is 3:06 p.m. and on February 7th, and this is the Finance Committee meeting. Andy Steinberg, the chair of the committee.
Recording in progress.
Oops, I'll start again. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is the afternoon meeting of the Finance Committee meeting. It's 3:07. Our chair is just joining us now. So I was opening the meeting as vice chair, but I believe Andy has joined us. So Andy, I'm just at the point of making sure everyone can hear and be heard.
Okay, well, we'll start by, can you hear me?
Yes. Andy, our chair, is now in full control.
I just made it in barely, but thank you. This is the Finance Committee meeting of February 7th, 2023. This is being held as a, let me go back to my notes. I'm sorry. Needing to do this. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 is extended. This meeting is being conducted via remote means. Members of the public who wish to attend the meeting, they do so via Zoom or by telephone. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the meeting in real time via technological meetings. And I want to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded, so that I just wanted to give that notice. And I'm going to go through the members and make sure everybody can hear and be heard now that we've got the hopefully technological problems of the day solved. Anna Devlin Gauthier.
Hello, I can hear you.
Lynn Grusmer.
Present.
Bob Hegner.
I'm here.
Matt Holloway.
Present.
Bernie Kubiak.
I'm present.
Kathy Shane, I heard you before. And Alicia Walker.
Here.
Okay, so we have all members present and accounted for. And I see that we have members of the staff present also. Guilford Mooring, Amy Rusecki, Sean Mangano, and Athena O'Keefe, as well as our minute taker, Phil Kazin. So everybody is here. There's one thing that we'll need to do in a few minutes, but I think that the first agenda that I wanted to do first, actually, maybe Matt, do you want to go ahead and give the disclosure that you were prepared to give?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. My audio okay? So since we're going to start taking up matters relating to the elementary school vote, I wanted to make a disclosure regarding my role as a co-chair for a ballot initiative committee called Vote Yes for Amherst Schools. And because I'm an appointed member of this committee, I'm appointed to the Cultural Council, and then I also have I'm a public employee in Templeton Phillipston in the regional school district up here. I wound up consulting with both the state ethics board as well as the campaign finance board. So it was quite a series of interesting phone calls that I had. And the essence of the counsel that I was given was to file a disclosure of appearance of conflict of interest with the town clerk, which I did about 2 weeks ago, and then to make this disclosure here that I'm a member of that committee. As an appointed member of these committees, my role is just to kind of assess the facts and make sure that I can perform my duties in the committee objectively and fairly, and I believe that I can. I believe I can participate objectively and support the public interest of the town in the discussion. And then as a public employee, the ballot initiative committee has had to put firewalls in place to prevent any kind of interaction between myself and fundraising in any way. And so, we've done those things. We've taken all the action that the council has advised me to do. And so I'm very confident that I can continue to serve the public interest, in these matters. And should anything come up that appears that I cannot, I will, promptly recuse myself from those discussions.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And Bill will make sure that it is included in the minutes that you have made this disclosure. And Bill, if you have any questions about the wording that you feel you need advice, you can contact Matt. So having said that, what I'd like to do is proceed into the agenda of the meeting, and we're going to do the public comment after we do the water and sewer and Centennial, since we have two staff members present for that. And I know we do have a few members of the public here, and I just want to assure them that public comment will be included in the proceedings today at a suitable time as we're discussing this school issue. And so, having said that, then I think that we can proceed to talk about the water and sewer regulations in the Centennial Water Funding Plan. And we have two people here to help us with the discussion, as well as Sean and Paul, who are also very involved in the process. But one of them is Amy Ursecki, and I want to congratulate you, Amy. Amy was awarded the 2022 Paul Howard Award from the Mass Waterworks Association, recognizing her for her knowledge and contributions to the professionalism and merit of the profession, and give her that special recognition, which is recognition that we know that is well deserved. So thank you. And
Thank you.
With that, I will turn it to whoever is most appropriate to
Andy,
talk.
I just see that Alyssa's hand is up. I'm not sure.
Okay, Alicia.
Alicia.
Your hand is up. We just wanted to know if.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Sometimes I have issues with my mute and my unmute button. I was just wondering, because on the agenda, the discussion for the debt exclusion override comes first. And so I'm just wondering, we're moving that to the second half of the conversation, because that was something I really wanted to be a part of, and I do have to leave at 4 o'clock.
Let me ask you, Amy and Guilford, are you flexible enough to go off and take some other things and come back in 1 hour? And that will give us time to do public comment and do the schools. And then we'll come back, if that's all right with you, and we have those two issues, and that will accommodate Alicia's problem.
Yes, that's fine.
That's fine with both of you? Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So you don't have to stay, but we'll look for you to come back in an hour. Okay, so with that, I'm going to reverse the goal, because I wanted to do public comment offer public comment before we started the school discussion. If there are any members of the public who wish to make comment about any matter pending before the committee, please raise your hand. And I recognize that we have one person who has raised their hand, and that's Tony Cunningham. So Tony, welcome to the meeting, and please offer your comment, try and hold it 2 or 3 minutes if possible, but please go forward.
Thank you. Tony Cunningham, Owen Drive. Just wanted to make a couple of comments. One was there's a lot of CPA materials in your packet, but nothing on your agenda about CPA. So I was curious if you were planning on discussing the CPA applications today. And if you were, I had a question about why the Ball Lane $750,000 is listed as using an undesignated fund balance, but a smaller amount, the CPA amount for the Fort River Fields, is listed as a borrowing, and why that could that be reversed? And then on your item 3 about the debt exclusion, now that we have an estimate of the impact on taxes, I see that Scott Mersbach has an article in the paper now which quotes $500 as the average impact to taxpayers. I wonder if it's the right time, I think it is the right time, to start seriously considering the use of reserves for this project. I know Sean Mangano said last night that the DPW fire station and the Jones Library projects depend on the use of reserves, but it seems to me that all councillors have at one point or another expressed that the school project is the highest priority for the town. And I think it is very important that it be a success, and that reserves, at least 10 million, ideally 15, should be earmarked for the school to lower the override. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the comment. Let me answer your one question about the date for the CPA discussion. CPA committee has been invited to make a presentation to the Finance Committee at our next meeting on February 21st, and the presentation of the projects and discussion of the CPA proposal will be will be on the 21st of February. So with that duly noted, and seeing that there's no other nobody else has raised their hand, I've kept an eye out to see if there's anybody else who has, and the other questions are duly noted. We should then turn to the questions of the override, and I'll turn it to Sean.
So Andy, I'll look for guidance on what would be helpful. I can do a condensed version of the presentation last night, if that would be helpful. I know I don't know if all resident members were there, but I know I saw Bob, I think, last night for sure. So I could do a condensed run through that if that's helpful, or just go to the tax impact slide and do a quick overview of that. Happy to do whatever is useful for the committee's discussion.
Let me ask the resident members to raise your hand if you were not able to be at the meeting last night. Okay, two out of 3 were not there last night, so I think it would probably be worthwhile doing a very brief review through the presentation, because it sets the stage for the discussion.
Okay, can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Good. All right, so I will skip through some of it. So just a quick recap of where we are. We have a fully reconciled cost estimate for the project. This will be the last cost estimate we get before the town votes on the project, for the council and the voters of town vote on the project. We've already, through different avenues, reduced the cost of the project, or at least lowered the cost to the town by about $8 million between cost saving measures that the school building committee has approved, in terms of just scaling back some of the pieces of the project, or some of the elements of the project, going with less expensive options, and advocating to the MSBA for higher reimbursement levels, which will increase. We estimate that impact to be $3 million or more to the town. In addition to that $8 million, there's another $2 million or so between Eversource rebates that we're pursuing, related to the geothermal wells, primarily related to the geothermal wells of the project, And then the CPA request of 700,000 that the CPA committee has recommended, but still needs to be voted on by the council. So all in all, about $10 million of offsets are sort of right in front of us for this project. And the town will consider looking for other ways to reduce it. One of the other major ways we're considering are looking at tax credits through the Inflation Reduction Act that Kathy sent a nice email earlier that they are now available. And it's really just a matter of how do we work with the MSBA and this new tax credit program to get that credit into the town and use it to offset the cost of the debt exclusion, or offset the borrowing. So we are preparing for 3 votes. The council last night had a discussion around the dates of the special election and the language that would go on the debt exclusion, or the debt exclusion language that would go on the ballot. That debt exclusion language the council has to vote on, and it requires a 2/3 majority vote of the council because it's related to debt. The next vote, which is tentatively scheduled for April 3rd, is the debt authorization to fund the project. So this will be for the full cost of the project, and this will also require 2/3 majority of the council, again, because it's related to debt. And then the last vote would be the approval of the debt exclusion, which would be by the voters in town, and that is tentatively scheduled for May 2nd, and that's just a simple majority to pass it. This chart shows the project costs that were initially presented to the town council. As I mentioned last night, this chart has the bottom line on this has increased slightly as Friday's elementary school building committee meeting, the owner project manager presented a couple items that have increased in cost since the first time they presented this. And those items are furnishings, equipment, and technology, and builder's insurance while the building is being constructed. So those couple items have been increased, and the overall cost went up by between $200,000 and $300,000 as a result. So there will be a new version of this chart that you'll see at some point that's slightly higher, but those numbers aren't material enough to impact the exclusion information that you see in a little bit. Bless you.
Thank you. Sorry.
So we're proposing to fund this project primarily through a borrowing that would be repaid from additional taxation authorized by the passage of the debt exclusion. As I mentioned before, there's a couple additional avenues we're looking at to offset the amount that we'll have to borrow. And we're continuing to look for additional ways to reduce the borrowing, but we are trying to keep the lens that was established by the town council of trying to move all 4 building projects to completion. And so when we think about ways to offset the amount to be borrowed, trying to do it in a way that doesn't then negatively impact another project and the ability of that project to be completed. There's a couple different ways we can structure the debt. We can structure it in a level payment option that operates like a mortgage, where you pay the same amount for the life of the debt, but you end up paying a little bit more overall costs under this option. The alternative is a level principal, where it starts out higher and descends over the length of the borrowing. And this option's a little bit less overall cost, but the early years can be more difficult to manage. So what we're proposing at this point is a level payment because those early years are more manageable, and it would we think it would be better for the taxpayers to have a sort of flat, consistent amount throughout the life of the debt. This chart shows the cash flow for the project. It's an early version that will continue to be updated and modified as the project schedule moves forward and as costs become more concrete. The intent of the slide is really just to show that the majority of the costs are expected to start going out the door in 2025 and 2026 when construction picks up. And that I use this chart with the financial advisor to map out how much we need to borrow each year and the timing of those borrowings. So what is a debt exclusion? Debt exclusion is a temporary
John,
increase.
Can we go
Yep.
back to that funding
Sure.
cash flow chart?
Yep, go ahead.
Actually, there's another question too, in terms of how the debt is structured, and we'll get into that maybe later as to whether or not the
Sure.
bond's going to be callable. Could you just walk through this? Because I frankly found this a little confusing.
Yeah, so
Hate to
again,
admit it, but I'm
no,
confused.
it's okay. I'll be honest, the intent of this chart is not to dig into the specific numbers at this point. It's really just to give a sense of the flow of the project. But what you'll see here, the solid blue line is the cumulative cost of the project. So it kind of builds every month that there's more expense that builds up. So you see that blue line, solid blue line growing until it reaches the total cost of the project at the very end, 97 million. The bars, the gray bar and the blue bar. So the gray bar is sort of what's budgeted, and then the blue one is sort of what's remaining. And since we're not really there yet, that's why they sort of equal each other. And so really what we're looking at there is just sort of the height of those bars as they go up. That's how much we're expecting will go out the door. And so for that, you're looking at for the bars, you're looking at the axis on the left side. For the solid blue line, you're looking at the axis on the right side. And then, yeah, I think those are the major elements of this chart.
Thanks.
And did you have a question on the debt structuring now, or do you want to wait till later?
But let's take it up later. It's a little esoteric.
Okay. So what is a debt exclusion? It's a temporary increase in property taxes that allow the town to levy in excess of Proposition 2.5 on a temporary basis for the debt service of a particular capital project, in this case, the Fort River School. So as the debt service, once the debt service is paid off, this additional tax levy would go away. It's applied to all taxable properties. And the last one that the town successfully implemented was back in 1994 for renovations to the regional high school, which we were actually levying additional taxes related to this as recently as 2016, 2017. This was part of the levy. People may not have known. I'm sure people didn't even realize it. So we looked at the language. So this is the draft language for the ballot question. This is from a template provided by the MSBA. It's been reviewed by our bond counsel, our local legal counsel, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and the Department of Revenue. There was feedback last night about, is there a way to make this question easier to understand to voters, because the way it reads is certainly not the way. It's not simple to understand. You have to have a lot of education to know which way you want to vote. So we're looking into that, but there are limits that the law sets on how the question has to be worded, because really the question is whether to exempt the debt or not from Proposition 2.5, which is just that in itself is sort of a complicated concept to understand. And then this next one is the debt authorization language. And what I mentioned last night was that the previous language, everyone has approved. This language, there is a question on some pieces of it, because the town is now, because Amherst is now a city, not technically a town, and there's some things that towns can do that cities can't. And so our different legal counsels and approving bodies we're working with them right now to find language that will satisfy all of them. Bernie, did I see your hand go up again, or was that from before?
I just actually took it down.
Okay. So estimated tax impact. So we are modeling this right now. The impacts that you'll see are modeled on a financing plan that assumes we use temporary financings or short-term financings called bond anticipation notes throughout the construction process. And then once the project is done, we would do a permanent financing, a bond at the end. And so the town would have to make interest payments each year when we do the bond anticipation notes. And then once we convert it to a bond, we would have to make principal and interest payments. This plan assumes a level payment debt structure. The additional taxation from the debt exclusion would start when we have to make those interest only payments that in 2025. The nice thing about that is it would be a lower amount. So in 2025, it would go up maybe about halfway. And then it would ramp up a little bit each year until it got to 2029 when we start making the principal and interest payments. And then it would reach a fixed level from that point forward all the way until 2054. And then it would drop off a little bit and then completely terminate in 2056. So the information that you'll see on the next slide is that maximum level that it reaches in 2054, where it will be for the majority of the debt. But there will be a few years before that where it's a lower impact as it kind of ramps up. And one thing I mentioned last night, I'll mention again, is this is a conservative way to model it. If interest rates are, if during the life of the project, early in construction, if interest rates are really good, something happens where interest rates drop off, and we could bond earlier because we want to lock in borrowing that money at a low interest rate. There's things we can do at that time to take advantage of that and reduce the cost to taxpayers. And so there are options that we will continue to evaluate, but some of those things we just won't know until we get there because it's still 2 or 3 years off. And then the last thing I'll just say is that the chart you'll see on the next slide, it already incorporates the CPA funds and the Eversource rebates. So it's based on a borrowing amount of about $53 million, which is the $55 million town share less the roughly $2 million of other sources listed here. So this chart, what you'll see at the top is the town of Amherst tax rate, which is $20.10 per thousand currently. The impact of the debt exclusion based on the assumptions of the financing plan right now is $1.07 per thousand. So for an average single family home that's assessed at $446,953 right now in FY23, the impact of the debt exclusion, which is that last line of the middle chart, is $478.24. And the chart below that provides different assessed values, and then the column all the way to the right gives you the estimated impact, debt exclusion impact for those values. And the way to figure out your specific value is to take the assessed value of your home, whatever it may be, divide it by 1,000, and then multiply that number by the $1.07, and that will give you the specific, the estimated annual impact for that value property. So what can change, either better or worse? The overall cost of the project until we get the construction bids in and sign a construction contract. That's a big variable that could change. The numbers that we have now do include a large estimate for construction escalation. So we're hoping that will mitigate any of this, the impacts that we're seeing out there in the construction industry, but it is an estimate. So until we go out for bids, we won't have a final cost there. And that obviously is the largest cost of the project. The projected interest rate will have a large impact on the annual debt service costs, and that's jumped all over the place in recent years or in recent months, but mostly up. The timing of expending funds will impact how much we have to borrow each individual year. The tax base of Amherst has grown a lot in the last 6 or 7 years. If we see similar levels of growth in the tax base, and not just the homes being worth more, but if we actually make improvements and add new facilities and developments and actually grow the number of parcels that pay taxes, that can help defray the individual impact of the debt exclusion. And that can happen throughout the life of the debt, but so we do anticipate that the number that we showed on the prior slide will get a little bit better each year as we go forward as the tax base grows. The anticipated reimbursement from the MSBA can change. We have we're working on a maximum amount with them, but what they reimburse on is what you actually submit, and making sure that everything is an eligible cost as we submit it. And then the last thing is the availability of other funding sources, like the tax credits that I mentioned. If we are able to get any other funding sources to reduce the amount the town will have to the town has to borrow, we have to work with the MSBA on this as well. They're a key decision maker on whether we can offset our costs completely, but we are going to continue to explore other ways to reduce the costs to the town. And then I just have one more slide, Matt, and then I think it'd be a good time for questions. So we're obviously reviewing this today, and we'll continue to update the financing plan as we go forward.
Sorry, Sean, I may have missed this, and I apologize. And first of all, thank you very much. This is really well prepared and clean information. I may have missed this. Is that $1.07 per thousand? Is that a constant year over year?
So it is. It's not a constant necessarily year over year. It could go down a little bit again as the tax base grows. So that's the number that it is based on the information right now.
But in terms of how the debt is structured, if everything stayed the same, it would stay the same.
Yes, if everything stayed the exact same, that $7 would stay the same if there were
Great,
no
thank you.
changes. Yeah.
Is the proposal, and I mean, it is something that's open for discussion in the committee. But staff proposal to the committee is that we elect the option of having level payments over the course of the loan as opposed to funding it with the alternative method that Sean showed earlier.
Yeah, and on that, Andy, I think ultimately the decision of how to structure the debt is the town treasurer and the town manager. But obviously, we would take, if there's a strong recommendation from the committee or strong feeling from the committee, they would take that into consideration. But you don't have to vote on the debt structuring. We just wanted to make sure you're aware of the options.
But it is based on that choice of that option.
Mhm.
Okay, I see Bob, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a few comments, just thoughts, some of which are a little scary to me, some of which are maybe not so scary. But the first thought I have is that looking at Centennial and looking at just the cost estimates for the school, we've had an increase for the school of almost $10 million over the last, 9 months or so. So we're not going to go to bid for a while. So my guess is that we should plan that this is going to cost more than what we see here on our estimate. And, in terms of thinking about what debt we're going to incur and what the impact on taxpayers is going to be, I think we should be thinking along those lines. The other kind of scary thought I have is this new school is going to incorporate a lot of new technology. We've got a geothermal system. We maybe have new materials. In my experience, these things don't always work the way you think they're going to work. And we may have more costs associated with these new technologies than we're anticipating. So again, I would caution that we want to maybe have something in our sort of our debt amount to take account of that. On the flip side, we've heard through various meetings that there may be significant cost savings associated with the new school. Utility costs will go down, and more importantly, we'll consolidate Wildwood and Fort River into one building, so we'll have lower personnel costs, presumably. It's not clear to me, and I haven't seen anything in the presentation of what the town intends to use these savings for, or how we intend to use these savings. And I would recommend that we use whatever savings we can, that we see, to draw down the debt as quickly as possible so that we're burdening the taxpayers as little as possible. I just was looking also at the amount for public art of $250,000, and I think the council should reconsider this. I know that there's language that allows the council to override the whatever is 0.5% amount. It just seems like it's a lot for one building. So again, maybe it's not going to drive things, but it would be something to consider. The other thing, one question I have is, do we know what the impacts on renters in town will be? We have the impacts on homeowners, residential people, but I haven't seen anything in the presentation on the impacts of renters. So I wonder what that might be. And the other thing I have is really a request, and that is whatever the surtax or whatever we call this amount that is additional tax because of the debt exclusion, could we see that as a separate line item on property tax bills? So then we can just see it every year or every quarter. And, you know, if it goes down, we can see it's going down. But I think it would be helpful for taxpayers to see that it's not just blur it, throw it in with all the other, well, the general taxes. I think it would be helpful. And that was a lot to say, I'm sorry, but
Andy, can I respond to some of it?
Yes, go ahead.
So I think your concerns around cost increases totally valid. We've seen that with the library project. We've seen that with Centennial, as you noted. The one, I guess, there's one reality is that the cost estimates for the school were done pretty recently at the end of December and January. And I think my hope and you know, our expectation is that cost estimators by that time have realized that the industry is going up. And I think cost estimators, they don't like coming in under, right? If anything, they want to come in a little bit higher. So we do have a pretty significant contingency within the construction budget already for cost escalation. And then we also have construction cost contingency that belongs to the town as well. But again, there's never any guarantees until we get the construction bids in. In terms of the cost savings, operational cost savings, I think that's something we're talking about, how to communicate that information. You know, the reality is some of that will be decisions made by the elected bodies at that time, how those funds are used. But I think you're right that we need to get that out there more. It was information that we had to report to the MSBA, so the numbers exist. I think Kathy, you worked on it with the schools to get that information to the MSBA. So that point's well taken. I think impacts on renters. So you know, if we assume that higher taxes will be passed on to renters, which I think generally we do, that means there will be an impact on renters. It'll be different than the way it impacts the taxpayers themselves, because we don't know if it'll be passed on one-to-one or how that will work. But any individual rental property owner, again, can do the same thing and take the assessed value of their property, multiply it by the $1.07, or divide by 1,000 and multiply by the $1.07 to evaluate the impact on that property. And then I'll have to talk with our treasurer collector to see if we can put the debt exclusion impacts as a separate line on the tax bill. I tried to see what we did last time, and it didn't look like we did that, but I totally understand why it would be just better for people to see exactly what that is. But the one thing I will say is that we clearly cannot lump the debt exclusion in with our regular levy. You know, that's the key difference between the debt exclusion and override, is that override kind of gets lumped in. That's your new base going forward. You get 2.5% on top of that each year. But the debt exclusion is completely separate. We don't get to increase the tax base or the tax levy by 2.5% on top of it. It's completely carved out as a separate piece of the levy.
no, I understand that. But again, it would be important as a to communicate to people that we're not doing that. You know, that
Right.
their taxes are going up 2.5% based on the amount that's excluding the levy,
Right.
the additional levy.
So I should be able to find that out by the time we meet again on the 28th about this.
Thank you.
Kathy, did you have anything that you wanted to respond to? Because you had your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to, just expand a bit on what Sean just said, Bob. You know, what he said about very recent, they were using actual purchase prices from end of 2022, built schools that have been recently built, so they weren't trying to go backwards. And they have 9% out for less than a year and a half as a growth. And there's 5 million on top of everything that is a pure contingency. They have a design contingency as they get more specific. So some of these, the actual specking out, so that as Sean said, it doesn't protect against everything, but there's a lot of buffer in what they've done. And then the only other thing, I thought it was a good point of these are complex systems, and we got a question on both what might go wrong, but also we got a maintenance costs of complex systems compared to systems we have now. That was a question that came up in the forum, and we haven't addressed it. So I just wanted to say that goes into your mix. My final point, and then turning it back, there was some uncertainty on whether how does a municipality get a tax credit? And this is all wrapped up in this new Inflation Reduction Act, oddly named, but they put direct credits for otherwise tax exempt in the code. And those became live. I just got confirmation from our congressperson's office that they're live, that if we right now bought a PV system and we paid cash for it, we'd get 30% back in a direct credit. We don't know how that works, but he said these are real and they're unlikely to be taken out of the code. So that's another piece when you were saying savings, where could we earmark them? You don't get anything till you've bought the stuff, right? And they have wording about geothermal and ground source heat pumps. I don't know how broad that is, but between those are multiple millions of dollars if we can figure out, as Sean said, we don't normally file taxes as a town and have a little thing on called credits. So these are new so that you don't have to do what some schools were doing, is they were going to a private entity that could file for the credits and basically having them put the solar on the roof and give you only partial thing toward your electricity bill. So you didn't save as much on utility bills. So but they got the credit because the school couldn't get the credit. So this gives you a different route to own the solar. So that's a little complicated, but it looks like it's real money. It's just that I can't find any place that has taken advantage of it yet because it just went on the books in January this year, 2023. That's it.
Good, thank you. Alicia?
Thank you, Andy. So I want to echo a lot of the comments that Bob made. I think he touched on a lot of the things that I was going to say. And I know it's a little bit tricky based off of the conversation we had at council last night in terms of like what I can do in my capacity as a counselor in terms of like advocating versus educating for this project. And so I'm not sure if this question even makes sense, but I think you'll understand where I'm going with this. Has there been any outreach to taxpayers, more specifically vulnerable taxpayers, as to which style might be more helpful for them, or is the town just assuming these things? So like what kind of outreach can or has been done for taxpayers who will have to do this? Because my concern is that the ballot question gives you no idea as to what you're agreeing to. And I know we talked about the language and what is legally allowed yesterday, but it's still my concern that there will be people who will be like, yeah, absolutely, I want a new school, and who don't understand what that means in terms of the implications on the tax payments that they will have to make for the new school, because that is very unclear in the ballot question. And so what kind of outreach is happening to taxpayers, and what kind of systems are we putting in place to support people who may be negatively impacted by the debt exclusion override vote if it were to pass?
So I'll briefly touch on it and turn it over to Paul or Kathy who want to weigh in more about what's coming up. But I think last night's presentation was sort of the kickoff to the engagement process that, to your point, Alicia, is to engage taxpayers and get their thoughts, their concerns, questions, so that we can address them over the next couple of months.
Yeah, and I would just add that again, this is last night was the beginning. As we develop these things, as we get feedback from people, we have developed a pretty long list of questions that people have raised, and this is a good one to add to that. Impact on renters, impact on other property owners, and we'll have that information all ready to be shared with people.
Thank you. Is it okay if I continue, Andy?
Yeah,
with
go
a
ahead.
couple of comments? Okay. So I think that's great. I think for me, I don't have a question as to whether or not this will affect renters. I'm pretty sure that it will. As a renter myself, I can understand that when fees or costs increase to my landlord, that increase gets passed on to me. That has happened literally to me last month. This happens all of the time. I expect there to be an impact on renters. And so my concern, or what I want to know, is not whether or not there will be an impact, but what the town will do to help offset or alleviate that impact. or what the town has been thinking about. And so I understand that we're sort of at a launch point right now, but my other concern is that like we're asking or considering for this vote to happen in May, which is very soon. And we've been working on this project for a long time. And I think, in my opinion, we should be further along in what possibilities exist to be able to offset these things for taxpayers, and that these things should be known before the May vote, which is again very, very soon. So I'm wondering how quickly we think these things we will get information on these things. I know I've been in brief conversation with Kathy about outreach that we're going to do. So I know there's going to be outreach, but that outreach has nothing to do with not much to do with the tax portion of it. It has more to do with like what is happening with the school building itself. And so I think we're missing this really huge piece on the financial impact education. And I think, I mean, in my opinion, because that's a scary piece, like we don't want to go out to taxpayers and be like, hey, look at this, and then expect that this is going to be a successful thing. And so again, I think it's going to be like critically important for the town to do the work on the front end rather than waiting to hear from people to figure out what they can offer to people, so that we can go out to people and say, hey, we need this new school. We need you to vote on this. This is what's going to be in place if you can't do this, if you can't afford these things, because I fear that people who cannot afford this will not vote yes. And so how can we make sure that there are things in place for those people?
I think that's a really good point, and we can work on that. That's an excellent point.
Bernie? Bernie, you're muted.
Thanks, Ian. As you're thinking about constituencies, you have to think about grandparents. As we've learned from other votes, or at least I've learned from other votes, a lot of this debt exclusion for schools really turns on whether or not grandparents are willing to and see the impact on their grandkids or other people's kids and step in for it. You can look at votes that have override votes that have happened in other towns and see that those of us who are of age are a critical factor. And I understand everybody's worried about the costs. Well, I was worried about the costs 5 years ago. Things have gotten worse. And I commend the work that everybody's done to try and bring the costs down and make this a more reasonable project. I do appreciate a lot of what Bob said and Alicia said. I will say, having been through 2 construction and 1 school renovation projects, I learned, the cynic in me has learned not to count on any operational savings going anywhere except staying in the budget. I'm sorry, but that's the way it happens. So I think we need to proceed as if there would be no substantial savings. I also agree, as somebody who fancies himself an artist, that the $250,000 public art piece can go. It's a small amount, but I think it's an important gesture. I was going to ask Sean about at what point do we think we could have some actual numbers tied to level payment versus level principal? And if you wanted to show on tax bills that the impact of the override is going down year to year, you really need to do the level principal approach. But I think, again, we'd like to see some numbers tied to that. And the other kind of decision discussion it would be is whether or not the bond's going to be callable. My understanding is if it's callable, we may pay a little more in terms of interest, but we open up the prospect of refinancing it. Midway, we did that with one of the schools in Belchertown and saved some serious money. So by all means, please take a look at that with our financial advisors and see how things are going. Thank you.
Can I quickly follow up, Andy?
Yes.
So Bernie, when you say numbers related, you just want to see what the impact would be if we did the level principal instead of level payment, because the numbers that we've shown are based on the level payment.
Yeah.
I did this is a rough number, but I'll get the debt exclusion, our financial advisor to model it with the level principal. But it was about $100 more in the early years if we went with the level principal on the average single family home. But again, I'll get him to do a more sophisticated model and can do a side-by-side comparison. Again, that decision ultimately will be made by the treasurer and the town manager at the time we actually go out to borrow. I worry a little bit about creating confusion around, which one way we're going to go, because ultimately that's not something that is being decided right now. And then I think the other, what was your second question, Bernie?
Wasn't it well, the thing about the bond being callable?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So typically our bonds are callable after 10 years. So you're 100% right. We would want to structure this in a way where we could refinance it at some point in the future, especially if the interest rates when we go out to do this are still 4 or 5%. We'll structure in a way that it could be refinanced in the future, and so we could take advantage of lower interest rates if they pop up.
Super. Thank you.
Okay, so I have 3 Post-its. First is, Sean, can you give me an example? You referenced this last night, and I apologize, I didn't have time to study it before today. You referenced some of the differences between what cities can do and what towns can do in terms of the verbiage in the, I believe it was the financial order. Can you give me an example of what that is?
Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. There's one specific thing, and it's in the wording of the debt authorization. The final section says that the debt authorization is contingent upon the passage of the debt exclusion. And there's a Proposition 2.5 manual that's pretty clear that only towns can do a contingent vote and that cities can't. And the rationale behind that was towns, they have town meetings, they only meet twice a year. So there was more sort of flexibility granted to them to take a contingent vote than cities that can meet regularly. So there's a little bit of question around how that has been interpreted in the past with other projects, which is why there's a conversation back and forth, because it sounds like, I'm not 100% sure, but it sounds like maybe they've granted that flexibility to cities as well in the past. So that's what we're working out and just making sure that whatever we vote, everyone is good with.
Got it. Okay. So the second question I have is about percent for art. And my Post-its got out of order. Sorry. Okay. So can we defer the percent for art and spread it out differently? And maybe that doesn't really make a difference in terms of how it gets applied, but I'm thinking, Kathy, I knew you'd have an answer for me, Kathy. And so then the second part of that is the reason being, and I just pulled it up and I'm trying to dig through. So actually there was a really interesting presentation from our own minute taker, Bill from the Public Arts Commission back in the day about our percent for art bylaw. And it was really interesting to see some of the examples that were cited in that. And what I'm seeing in the bylaw itself is that the art cannot be something that our designers put in. So it can't be from Danisco. But Bill's presentation also had some really creative examples of things like a bike rack that is art because it looks like a big wooden comb. And so I'm curious if if there's a Venn diagram where these can meet in the middle, right? Where there's something that it's not done by Danisco, it follows the requirements of the bylaw, but and it satisfies that 250 or 260, whatever it was for percent for art, and then could be cut out of the sort of the furnishings or the soft costs as part of the building. I'm curious if there's any creativity in finding that middle of the Venn diagram. And I think that's it for now. Oh yeah, and valid question about the money saved in energy. It would be great if it could just be more than offsetting kind of future budget years and go back to cut back the debt amount, but I don't know how that's possible, but just voicing support for that idea. Thanks.
Kathy, you.
Yeah, I was just going to speak to the percent for art. Anna, I served on that with Bill. Bill was a real lead because he actually knew about these, and Bill is our note taker here. So, but there were 2 ways. The answer is it's separable, and it can't just offset the other soft costs. It's completely separable. So we have a clause in there that at council discretion, it doesn't have to be 0.5, it could be something less or it could be 0. So that's discretion. But the concept of it is, yes, it could be a creative bike rack. I was talking today, this is a net zero energy school. It could be a sundial, a beautiful sundial. So the kids could go, it could be a weather vane, so it could also be in one of the schools, and it was suggested at a forum that if there are things that the kids get involved in and create, and it's super cool, you create a big blow up of it, and we've got space in the school to hang it. So you see when you come in, and it doesn't have to be permanent, or that could be tiles, and they're both. So these usually go through some sort of, the user population is throwing out ideas, you're getting a sense. And the only thing that when we wrote the bylaw is if it was going to be an integral part of the building, a fountain built into the side of the building with a picture of one of the Native Americans, which we don't have, then it had to be thought of in conjunction with the design of the building. But they've designated some places outside and inside. If we wanted to put something up on a wall, we've got tons of outdoor space. So we can change the amount, and we can do some of this later when we're further along. And the content of it can be highly variable. What is it? What is the it? And all over the map, birdhouses built by kids and adults with someone helping them construct. I'm just thinking of, it's an elementary school, but in any case, probably what we can't have is a lot of bronze statues of animals, because that money doesn't go very far for bronze. So I just want to say it's very flexible on what it is, but it would not offset any of the soft costs for the school, or the desks and chairs that the kids sit in. The linoleum that goes on the floor, the tech, the computers, and we're pretty tightly budgeted. The school is quite tightly budgeted for the stuff inside the building. That's it on that.
Okay, thank you. So Lynn, you had your hand up.
Yes, first of all, this is the kind of discussion that I think we've all been waiting for, and this group and the people in our audience have opened up a lot of interesting things. So I want to thank people for that thought, for all that thought. I'm going to, for the moment, just speak to one thing about percent for art. There is presently a mural on the existing Fort River School. My understanding is that the students want to have it moved, and that in the architectural design, there is a space on the wall of the outside of the school that it could go to. And if it's $250,000 we save, it's $250,000, and we think about what we already have. I'm all for a percent for art, but I'm all for saving money. Second of all, I want to just raise the issue of the date and be very clear that while it feels like it's coming up fast, any delay in that date would delay the vote till sometime in the fall, because we have to wait until the higher ed institutions come back. Otherwise, we get accused of not being considerate of faculty and staff, as well as students. So the 2nd of May is just about as late as we can possibly go, when the students in our higher ed institution and the faculty are still in classes. And it's a date we have to work to, because if we delay to the fall, that means we will not be opening this school on that September in 2026, because we will have lost our window to get there. So one of the things I hope this committee either agrees on today or agrees on before the 27th, which is the next town council meeting, is to recommend to the council to be very firm about May 2nd. And the third thing, because this came up last night, because it's come up again, I feel that the only way that we can together have a conversation about the use of reserves is to go back to the financial model and make sure that built into one of our discussions is the financial model to understand the impact of the other building projects, the impact of ongoing other capital projects that are not necessarily as big or as dramatic, but they're incredibly necessary, like buying new pieces of equipment and so forth, sidewalks, roads, etc. So I would really strongly urge that in even if it means scheduling an additional finance committee meeting, maybe even at night, that if we need to revisit that model to educate people about where our money is and why we need certain pockets, that we do it, because otherwise that issue just keeps coming up. Just spend the money from our reserves without a care for tomorrow. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. I guess there's a couple things that I'll just interject and then go on to Bob, whose hand's been up. To in addition to the point that you just raised about the need to look at the model if you're going to seriously think about going to reserves, and what the effect is on the other buildings, because it has been council policy for some time that we're addressing 4 building projects, as to whether we then put ourselves in a position of asking for an override for an additional project, say the fire station. And the problem with doing that, amongst other things, is the cost of an election. We are there. I think that we haven't heard a projected number from the clerk or the finance manager yet, but cost of the election is on us. As far as dates are concerned, I'll expand on a remark I made last night when I was giving the committee report, where I said we don't have to make a recommendation at today's meeting, even though the agenda said that there will be one. And that was because when our architect and owner OPM put together a chart of dates and what needed to happen on each date to move the process along under their recommended timeline, they put the 27th council meeting, February 27th, as a date to vote the red exclusion language and the date of the election. And this was at that time, to their knowledge, going to be the last meeting of the finance committee prior to the 27th, because they were not aware that the committee had added an additional date of the 21st. So it makes February 21st the hard date. And so that's the expansion of my remarks from last night, just to clarify that. So Bob Hegner, back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that with regard to public art, I wasn't suggesting we eliminate it altogether. I was just saying that 250K seemed pretty high for one building. That's all.
Okay, thank you. And Kathy, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, mine is Andy, mine is a quick question that actually follows just on what you said. If we wanted to entertain a motion today to recommend May 2nd, could we just go ahead and get that off the board, that we think that's a good date? I'm not talking about the rest of it, but just could we take that piece? Because I think, I'm starting to talk about this project. I've been invited, and instead of saying tentative, maybe, whatever, I'd rather say it's May 2nd. So could we take a vote to recommend that today? That's
I would recognize a motion if one was made, because the agenda as posted was based upon the original plan that had come forward from the OPM and the architect. And so it's the agenda is discuss and recommend action. And what I was meaning last night and didn't say very clearly was that we don't have to take action today. Was what I should have said more clearly.
Well, I'm willing to make a motion that the Finance Committee recommends to the council that we set May 2nd as the date for the debt exclusion vote. If that, thank you, Lynn. That's Kathy moved and Lynn seconded. And Bill, I can give you that, but it was pretty simple, or Athena can give it to you. So it's that.
I got it. It's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, the other thing, Kathy, just because you and I were both on the committee that did the revisions to the percent for art, there is a procedure in the bylaw as we amended it and readopted it, and it was adopted by the first council that establishes the process for the selection of the art. And so.
Yeah. And we can put that on a future agenda because the building would have to be real, the project. So May 2nd is important. So that discussion could follow this. So.
I just wanted to clarify that, and I thought
Bill's
you and
hand.
I were there together.
Yeah, Bill's hand is up on this one.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm happy to give a brief talk or step out of my role as minute taker on another occasion and talk about percent for art. So just let me know.
Okay. Let's see how we're going today, because I don't think we need to address it today, but thank you for making that offer. Lynn, let me go back to you.
Actually, please go to Alicia next and then come back to me.
I will be glad to do so. Alicia.
Thank you, Andy and Lynn. So I have to leave and I can't stay for the vote, unfortunately, but I wanted to just say that if I was going to stay for the vote, my question would have been to Sean and Paul, if you all think that that is enough time for you to gather data and come up with possible solutions to the questions that I asked earlier, so that we can present some of that information to the voters before the May 2nd date. And that whether or not you all think that that is possible and that that is going to happen would directly affect the way that I vote on this.
So can I respond to that? I guess I would need more direction from the committee and the council what they're looking for. So the project costs have been reduced by $10 million already. If there's a target, that would be something that the finance committee would have to give us. The result may be that the impacts are the impacts, and we can share existing ways for those experiencing hardships or for seniors with limited income. We can share the existing ways that are already out there for people to have some relief from their tax bill. But as it relates to the debt exclusion, the impacts may be the impacts. Again, we're looking for other financing sources, but some of them won't be definitive before the vote. Like the tax credits, for example, we won't have spent the money in order to guarantee that the tax credits can offset the cost. We can share what we think they will be, but we also want to be careful about promises and making sure that we can, whatever we put out there, we feel really confident about. So again, the numbers may be the numbers that we've presented. Our goal, I think, is to get them down, but not let them get worse. That's sort of what we're
Sean, I think Alicia's also asking for clear explanations of what people are voting on, sort of a fact sheet.
In terms of the ballot language?
No, but yeah, and I know with the last one, you could know, I mean, you knew what you were voting on. So I'm just, yeah.
But I think what Alicia's saying is, what kind of resources can we bring to the table to support people who are going to have a hard time paying if their rents go up or if their mortgages go up? These impacts won't come forward for about 3 years. So there's really nothing we can do right now to offer that. We can look into some opportunities for that. But I think the first debt payments won't really hit the books until 2026, Sean?
2025 was the first. It would be a lower amount, and it would ramp up to 2029.
But I think if I'm hearing what Alicia's saying, is that she's looking for what kind of support can we give to people who are going to struggle when the payments start to hit.
So,
yeah, and all I'll say is that there's limits as to what the town can do That's not authorized by law. So that's the one thing is that, you know, we do have to operate within the options that the current Mass General laws make available to us.
Let's get back to Alicia, because if we're misunderstanding what she's asking, we need to hear her.
No,
Alicia?
it's okay. So Paul was right on the money. Kathy wasn't off because I know that that is also a piece of it, but Paul was more directly on what I was asking for. And I know that these aren't going to actually hit like taxpayers' bills until 3 years, but we plan things financially in advance all the time. This is something significant that we need to be in front of, not behind. Like we need to have ideas for possible solutions, for possible assistance before it happens. We cannot wait 3 years until people need help with the payments to then figure out how we will help people with the payments. I also, again, am asking this because I think it will directly impact the way some people vote on this issue. And so to have some of these answers before we're asking vulnerable people to make this vote, because I think there's a serious disconnect from public, like town leaders in this town with people who live in poverty in this town. Like there's a very strong disconnect, and I can like sense it very strongly in this meeting right now. It's very much bothering me because my family's financial standing, that there are people who will not be able to continue to live in this town once this payment hits. There are people whose kids will not be able to go to this school because this payment is going to hit. And we need to be thinking about them on the front end, not on the back end as a last resort. And so with that, I have to sign off, but thank you all for your time.
Okay, thank you. Lynn?
I'm sorry, Alicia had to go. But I do think that the more we can be starting to think creatively about the question she raised is important. But that's not why I raised my hand. There are two other related issues to this that the people keep wanting to know. And so I'm going to wrap it in the larger question, and that is, what is it going to cost the town if we don't pass this? What is it going to cost the town to keep those two schools operational? What is it going to cost the town to do that for the next 25 years? Because we will clearly have blown our chance with Mass School Building Authority to ever come forward in any time in our lifetime, because it'll be the second time we blew the chance. So we need to know what those buildings are going to have done to them in order to sustain about 25 more years of use. What does it mean in terms of staffing, where we might have had some savings otherwise? What does it mean in terms of energy? And the other question that comes directly with that is this hope and dream that somehow or another, the school that we're not going to continue to use is going to be able to be used for some serious, long-standing purpose in town, when in fact, we know that building is in bad shape. And so we need to answer the question, not only to say to taxpayers, you know, you may not like this, and it may cost you something, but the alternative could cost you X. We also need to be able to say, and this building that everybody looks at and says, oh, let's use it for this, let's use it for that, or whatever, what's it going to cost to even make it usable for anything? And so we need the answers to those questions.
Hey, not seeing anyone raising their hand and anxious to follow up on that. The motion on the floor is solely on setting the date for an override election. The other piece of the equation, which is the what it is, the language that we're putting on the ballot, what the specific request is really a separate matter that is not part of the motion. And therefore, if it's not done today, we can put that off to the 21st. But we do have a motion on the floor, and I do need to go ahead and take a vote on it if there's no further hands going up for discussion on the motion on the floor.
And
And
Andy, the only one I want to do is make sure Bill uses the word debt exclusion, because you've used override twice. So
you're right. You're correct.
I'm just saying, as long as I want the motion to read correctly, so we don't have to amend the words. That's it. Thanks.
Okay. So the motion on the floor, Bill, you have it?
Yeah, well, you can correct me. I have Shane moved, Griesmer seconded, that the Finance Committee recommends that the Town Council make May 2nd the date for the vote for the school debt exclusion.
Correct.
Okay, that is the motion that's on the floor. And if there's no other hands going up, then I will proceed alphabetically with Anna,
Aye.
Lynn,
Aye.
Bob,
Muted.
you're muted.
I guess I support, but I do share Alicia's concerns that we need to be prepared to communicate things prior to the 2nd.
Okay, but this vote is solely setting the date.
I understand.
Okay. Matt,
Support.
Bernie,
Support.
Kathy,
Yes.
I'm a yes, and Lucia is absent. Which I regret, but where we are. So that said, is there anything, Paul or Kathy, that you'd like us to discuss regarding the school today?
No, I think our goal will be, and I guess, let me know, Andy, if this is going to be the 21st or the 28th, but our goal will be to try to bring back the answers to the questions that were raised today at whatever the next meeting is that we discuss it. So if that's the 21st, we'll shoot for that. But yeah, we can work on the agenda when that's going to be.
Well, the questions that were raised today, I think that the request is to get the answers as quickly as possible. The timeline that was thrown at us by Margaret and Anna was discussing recommend action on debt exclusion and voted to vote on the 27th on debt exclusion language and date.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take what the two of them as our OPM and architect have recommended, we've done half of what they asked in making a recommendation for the council for the 27th, but we have not made the other half. And of course, the council isn't meeting till the 27th again. But we do have to come back on the 21st and have the discussion about the other half of that request, which is the language.
Yeah, and so there's, sorry, go ahead, Kathy.
I just say we also need to have CPA on that date, because we need a recommendation back on that, because Sean's calculation subtracts that out of the numbers he's looking at. So finance needs to make a recommendation to the council on the CPA proposals as well.
Yes, I think that's going to be the major discussion item, because the presentation that we just received at the beginning of the meeting from Sean has been added to today's packet. I think I sent it to everybody in advance by email, and it is in both the SharePoint and in the packet that's available to the public through the website. So that the language that we will, I think, is fairly straightforward. I think we already had some discussion at the council last night. And for those of you who are not at that portion of the council meeting, basically, the answer is that the MSBA and statute are very specific about what the language has to be. And that I also pointed out that by comparing the 2018 override language to the language here for those very same reasons, the language is virtually identical. So I'm not sure that it's going to be a long discussion, but we don't have to do it today. We can move on to the two water issues if there's nothing else that people want to raise about the school issue. And Sean, as far as we're aware, the CPA committee is prepared to make a presentation on the 21st.
Yes, yeah.
So we know what the agenda is going to be basically for the 21st. So is there anything else on that, or can I bring Amy and Guilford back?
They're here.
I know that they're here, but they're hiding at the moment. Hi, Amy.
Are you saying I have to wake back up again?
Yes. That.
Andy, I just had a request for the 21st. If the Community Preservation Act Committee could explain how much debt we have and what's debt and what's not debt. It's not clear to me just looking at this chart as to what it is. So I would like to have a better understanding of what it is we're committing to in debt versus actual, levies that we've raised.
Yeah, Sean actually said a little bit about that last night at the meeting, but I don't want to go into it again now because we can wait till the 21st. But that question was identified last night at the council meeting. Kathy?
And just in response to Bob, Sean can bring, the CPA has looked at that out multi-year, Bob, as well. So just the table they already have, it would be good for us to see. I'm liaison, so I've seen it, but it lays that out really clearly on how much is out and out years that's debt versus other. So I think we need to see the package, not just this year's proposals, right?
I agree. Thanks.
Okay. Bernie, because I really want to move on, but it's
very, very quickly. I served on a previous finance committee with Tim Neal, and looking at the minority report. And frankly, if Tim is raising, I learned that when Tim raises a question or an objection, you take it very seriously. So I would hope that the comments in that minority report get incorporated into the discussion.
Well, they're certainly before us because the committee provided the minority report, and it's been both for the council and the committee. So then if we go in the order of the agenda, we would do water sewer regulations and then Centennial. But I want to ask Guilford or Amy if they have a preference to order. Okay, so let me just give a quick description and then Anna can add to it because Anna and I are in the position of being on both committees that have reviewed the regulations, and Amy's probably spent more time than with the two of us than she would like to have to recognize, but it did happen. In any event, we all, I think we were all involved in the discussion the last time it came before Finance Committee, and it came with Sean's memo recommending for reasons that he stated very clearly, and I'm not going to attempt to repeat, that we delay the one part of the new regulations that changes ownership of both water and sewer between the respective mains and the property lines of the property, for 2 years. And there were reasons stated in the memorandum that he presented to us that explained why that recommendation was the appropriate action to take. And that's what we voted. The vote in the Town Services and Outreach Committee was slightly different. And it was different in that what it said was that the implementation of that section should be delayed for a 2-year period, and but that it would go into effect at the conclusion of the 2 years. And so that there are a couple things that we recognized. One is that if we don't come back together, and it has risks Amy having to go through the steps of revising regulations in 2 different ways. And so we wanted to see if we could bring the 2 committees together for that reason. And the other is to see if there's an ability to bring the 2 committees together on a single recommendation in any event, because then it would be an easy, it would ease the presentation at the council meeting. So I'm going to pause for a second and see if Anna has anything to add to what I said.
Sure. So thanks, Andy. I think really what this came down to was, what do we want to open back up in 2 years, right? And what TSO came to the conclusion of is that making this change is the right thing to do. And we recognize that this may not be the right time, but we don't want to have to start this process over again by having the council automatically need to go back through it in 2 years, having a new council need to go back through it. Even though chances are that they hopefully would approve it in 2 years, what we wanted it to be an automatic switch in 2 years. However, the council can always go back and go through it. And we have incredible town staff. We have very attentive community members and members of the finance committee who, if in 2 years do not believe that this is an okay move for the town to make, will bring this forward, and the council can open it up and redo it for discussion. But really what TSO was saying is that we want this to go into effect in 2 years, not to be redebated in 2 years, unless necessary. And so that's the kind of the Cliff Notes version of it, because we do believe that this is morally or ethically the right move in terms of supporting our community and not hitting people with undue bills for repairs. The other thing that we talked about was that the cost of insurance was effectively the same as this rate. And so that to say, well, we're not going to do this as the rate increase would be, I believe $7 per month. And so 7 or 8 each for water, and then for sewer, which is approximately the same amount as this is estimated to raise bills. And so, by saying we're going to go with the insurance option instead of making this change for everyone, we're really privileging folks who are going to choose to do that. And the folks who may be hit with the bills, but weren't in on the insurance plan, are still going to be hit with those big bills. So, because the cost is the same, we felt that this was the most equitable option, and we didn't want to have to be forced to rehash it in 2 years.
And I'm going to add one piece then, and then try and open it up to the rest of the committee for discussion, unless Amy or Guilford want to add to it first. And that was that a concern was expressed from the staff level that are we putting forward a risk that someone could find out that there's a problem with their water or sewer line that would be shifting ownership, and it happens during this 2-year interim period. If the decision is made to make it an automatic changeover, would it in some encourage people to delay doing the repair. And in sort of some follow-up discussions, and Amy can respond to this a little bit too, that could be addressed by just putting into the regulation that the responsibility for repairs remains with the owner of the line at the time that the problem is discovered, or something very similar. And that then if the ownership, if the 2 years ticks, that the discovery of the problem was clearly for the 2-year date, it doesn't change. So I know if Amy or Sean want to say anything on that, and then but if not, then I want to open it up to the committee to see if there's any discussion. Lynn?
Is okay, Andy. Sorry, real quick, if I respond to your
Yes.
comment. So we spoke about this yesterday, Amy, Paul, and I, and with Guilford. And I think, what we were trying to find is some middle ground between the two sort of options being considered. And so I think the thing that we don't have a perfect solution, but we just wanted there to be something, before the 2 years where this would, if the version of the TSO is approved, moves forward, we want there to be something before that automatic date where it kicks in, where we would at least come back together and review it. So that there's some action that has to happen just to make sure that at that time, there's no surprise costs that have come into play, or if consumption hasn't dropped off more than we thought. So if there's some action that has to happen at that time before we have a sort of this increase in costs kick in automatically.
Paul?
And I think Paul probably wants.
Yeah, I think what's important is for the council to recognize that we are changing what the status quo is. The council's making a policy decision to change the status quo in terms of ownership of these service lines. When we change that, when you make that policy decision, there's a cost involved that you're imposing on the ratepayers. So as long as we're doing that with open eyes, there are going to be cost increases to people when you make that policy decision. And I know we've had a lot of conversations about minimizing impacts on property owners and minimizing, trying to mitigate the impacts of a debt exclusion or property tax increases. But I just think we need to be really explicit that this is a policy decision the council is making. It's going to cost people money, a certain amount of money in their water bills every year, every month, whenever we bill. And that's I agree with the policy decision, but we should do it with eyes wide open.
So, Lynn, going now to committee members.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest and say I'm sitting on the fence on this one. And part of it is because Sean and Paul came to us with a recommendation because of unknowns. And one of those unknowns has since surfaced. We're going to be talking about it as soon as we're done with this piece. And one of the things that I feel strongly about is that whatever we do, we don't tie the hands of future councils. We've been legally told we can do that. And I understand we do that, particularly when you only have 2-year terms. But I really would like Sean and Paul, or Paul and Sean, either way, or Guilford or Amy, to chime in on those unknowns that first led.
I think she's frozen. I think you're frozen, Lynn. It was a dramatic moment, but you're frozen.
I think I know where she was going. Paul, do you want me to weigh in, or do you want to? Okay. The unknowns are still there, right? I mean, not much has changed since we wrote the memo in terms of the unknowns. The big unknowns are infrastructure costs, and consumption rates and which way consumption rates are going. And in the sewer fund, there's I think a couple of capital projects as well that we don't have final costs on either. So I think those are the unknowns. They're still there. And I think to what Paul was saying is just we looked at the trend of the rates as it without this change, and as you saw, they're going up pretty steeply because of these infrastructure projects. So this is just gonna it's gonna make it a little bit larger. But if that's a policy decision and if the the direction the council wants to move in, we just want to make sure everyone knows it now, and I think you do, right? It's out there. So
Yeah, Amy.
Again, maybe this is obvious to everyone, but I feel like regardless of which way, I mean, really what we're talking about, does this default to the town doesn't own unless we change, unless we change something, or does the town take over ownership unless we change something? And I think regardless of which way we land on it, 2 years from now, before that takes place, this committee here is going to be looking at the water rates, looking at the impact, and that's going to kind of force the conversation. If the rates go up too much the year that this hits, as well as Centennial and other things hit, then that might be, kind of the touch base to make another decision. I don't know. I feel like there is kind of baked into this whole system, there is a touch point on what we know. And at that point, we're going to have better information on what the costs might be of some of these other things, as well as taking over ownership.
Kathy?
So Lynn said she was on the fence. I'm not on the fence. I don't want to do this now. And Amy, I completely understand, like we could not do this now and we can revisit it. And I don't want to do this now because we're taking on a new obligation that imposes costs on ratepayers, and we know that. We can't tell people right now that we're fixing their potholes. And I would like to know that at least, what value am I getting for what I'm paying for now without adding. And the Centennial, these are kind of shocking, and I know it was not in your control, but that needs to settle in. And I would love it if somewhere in the next couple years, and this is, I feel like it's a dead conversation, but maybe it's because it just didn't make any sense. Bernie, we talked about, is there a way of shifting some of the capital infrastructure costs to the really big users? And that was through the quarterly payment on the diameter of the pipe or whatever it was, and so we're in this vicious cycle of, if we economize on water, our rates go up because the infrastructure. And if UMass keeps growing, we need all the water we can get, so we don't have a choice of not having a water supply. So I would rather stay with what we've got and revisit this. And Anna, I understand that TSO went in a different direction. So I'm just trying to be as clear as possible. I'm on the other side of this. And it's not just the school vote. I feel like there's a lot of pieces that we're in this municipal finance box, that property tax is our main piece. And unless, who knows whether some other things start flowing, the surcharge that went into the state, we don't even know what that's going to look like yet. Maybe there's some relief in the future on other parts of it, but we're not offering that to anyone now. It's costs people can't avoid. So that's my piece. And I realize in a way you're saying it's imposing on everybody, so the few that would get hit by this aren't squashed by it when it hits them. And that's the whole principle of insurance. That's why you want to spread it. So Bob looked at a way of spreading it. But anyway, I'm coming on a don't do this now, do the other parts of the rate structure that we need to get on the books. So I will stop. That's my strong opinion and the way I will be voting, if we vote.
Okay. Matt?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, and thanks, Amy and all. I understand the discussion right now is on timing for the vote or timing for the change. And I, I support the delay if that does come to a vote. I think it makes sense. There's a lot of information to be gathered. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding. So at one point we did talk about insurance policies for ratepayer. So did we ever, I mean, is there information on that?
Yeah, so I thought we sent it out. Paul, Matt, you're talking about policies that individual homeowners
I
could.
apologize. If it's already gone out, then say no more.
Okay.
That's good to hear.
I'll
and
double
I just
check, but
missed
if not, we'll send it out. Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody referenced the rates earlier in terms of
Yeah,
what the cost would be.
Paul sent it out. I
Okay.
remember seeing that.
Okay, yeah, so I'll check that out, but I guess the point I want to make, whenever this change goes into effect is that, the $7 a month rate increase, whatever the rate increase is going to look like, I think, can and should be thought of as an insurance, either you pay private insurance, and protect yourself from a fairly significant cost, or you pay into the new rate increase. And that, I mean, that's kind of how I've understood this conversation. I think it makes really good sense. I find it kind of troubling, actually, the amount of homeowner liability that goes out to the mains. So, I do think it's the right thing to do. I also understand that there's a need to delay the decision, gather more information, make the case more compellingly. But I really, I'm thankful for all the work that's gone into this and the thought. And I do think that at some point, this is going to be the right thing to do. Thanks.
Bernie?
Yeah, just quickly, I would prefer not to put a requirement in place now that's going to come into effect in 2 years. I think this is one of those things that will creep up on you, that will cause some problems. And right now, we have to be very careful about making financial commitments of any kind. Financial pressures are out there. I frankly couldn't afford Amherst if I had to move in today. So I'm leery about, putting something on the books that's going to pop up in 2 years. And I would prefer that folks just take that up in the future when there's either new information, new technology, new revenue sources. And I'm also concerned about the water and want to get on with the vote on the treatment plant, because water is one of those resources that we just really need to hang on to, because it'll become, as with climate change, it's going to become more and more and more important. Thanks.
I'm going to just say one thing. I think that we lost Lynn for the moment. I don't know if she's going to be able to get back into the meeting.
Lynn lost access to the internet, so she's trying to get back in, but she hasn't been able to.
Okay, so we might hear from, I might postpone the vote if there's a motion made and go on to get a centennial presentation. But I just wanted to point out that there's a burden going on the ratepayers, and the question is, does it go on a small number of ratepayers who happen to have a problem that falls on their lines in the section that we're talking about, or do we spread out that burden to all ratepayers? But it's not a burden. The burden is on the water and sewer system. Anna, you have your hand up.
Thank you. And Andy, the point you just made is one of the reasons why I feel very strongly about this, is that when you think about the folks whose pipes are most likely to get hurt, right? It's not the new big developments. It's the folks whose houses are old. And I think one of the big concerns that I have is I'm concerned about lead pipes. I'm concerned about old infrastructure, right? And I'm concerned that people, who are responsible for pipes and aren't aware of what they're really dealing with, that we're really doing them a disservice by not supporting their infrastructure that's on town property. I think, I have a lot of questions about the infrastructure bill and the funding that's coming through, especially for lead pipe mitigation. And, a lot of that is a lot of specifically that area is administered through state revolving funds, which we are familiar with. And so I think that it's, while they may apply for private projects in some cases, I think having it be a town-owned infrastructure allows us to do more when we apply for and receive funding, hopefully through state revolving funds to address things like lead pipes. I also want to clarify one point. No one is saying that this would go into effect now. None of the proposals put this into effect now. Every single proposal that's on the table puts it into effect in 2 years. It's just a question of, does the entire set of regulations come back up for a vote by the council? Or is it that this part of the regulation, unless acted upon by an outside force, meaning a counselor, a finance committee member, or our town staff knowing that something's wrong, then it goes into effect, right? There is still an opportunity for discussion and debate. It's the same timeline. It's just a matter of, is it an automatic, it's on the agenda to discuss that full set of regs, or it's an automatic, it goes into effect unless that there has been a concern that has been brought up. And the likelihood is very strong that that will be true, right? Based on what we've heard. I think it's really a matter of saying that we're committing to this unless we realize we can't do it, versus we're not ready to commit to doing, I'm going to speak editorially, we're not ready to commit to doing the right thing to support our people in who are responsible for infrastructure they can't control financially. I think that for me is the question of whether we're saying we're committing to this, or unless there's a problem identified, or no, we're not ready. Thanks.
So where we are at is that the Finance Committee made a recommendation. If there is no motion made to change the recommendation that's made and seconded, there's no motion on the floor, and we go on to the next agenda item. It is on the TSO agenda also for Thursday. I don't necessarily expect that, I can't predict. I'm not even going to go into that direction. But what I am a little bit concerned about, and we don't have Lynn to help us with this as the process person for the council, is that then what we most want is a set of regulations that Amy and both committees have spent a lot of time on, and get them enacted and get them done. And in order to get them done, we have this one little glitch in them, and we need to have Lynn as the council president. Ultimately, in that case, if there's two different recommendations out of the two committees, making a decision as to how to go forward, and then she has to, I think, as council president, make that call as to how to proceed with that. And she, I suppose could get a presentation and come up with some sort of a process to make a decision on this, and then come so that Amy only has to draft one new set of regulations and then come back to a council at a subsequent meeting in fairly short order and conclude this, or how she would proceed. But I can't speak for her because we've not talked about it. I don't know if Paul, if you have had that discussion with her. So unless I see a hand, I'm going to assume that there is no motion being made. And if there's no motion being made, then we are where we are. And I'm going to go on to the centennial discussion.
Andy, sorry, I'm happy to make a motion, even though I predict it won't pass, but I'm a little, would you just have me say, I wasn't here for the first motion being made, and I don't know if we need to vote to rescind anything, or if I can just make a new motion, that even if it's contradictory.
I think you can make a new motion that would overturn the previous motion,
Yeah,
if that's what you want to do.
Okay, sure. So, all right, I'll do my best and get corrected here. So I move that the Finance Committee recommend the adoption of the updated water and sewer regulations with the ownership change going and trickle down effects going into effect in 2 years. So 2025.
okay, so I'm gonna look to see if there's a seconder on the motion. Bill, I know you're raising your point.
I just want to get that. Can you just say that again, Anna?
Sure, yeah. I was moving for the Finance Committee to adopt the water and sewer regulations with the ownership changes having an effective date of 2025.
Got it.
Thank you.
Can I just, for clarity's sake, we're saying the service line ownership portion of
Thank you.
the sewer and water regs having an effective date of 2025.
Yes, thank you. Service line ownership.
You got that, Bill?
I'm sorry, did you say a specific day in 2025?
I did not.
I think we'd want it to be July 1st
July 1, yeah.
when the new rates go into effect.
Great.
If that's a friendly amendment proposal.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sean.
So do you have that, Bill? The service line portion of the regulations going into effect July 1, 2025.
Got it.
Is there a second? Well, I don't see a second, so I think that the motion therefore is not on the table.
Mhm.
So under those circumstances, Sean, how do you recommend we proceed with the next agenda item, Centennial Water Facility?
Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
So I think for Bill, that the motion fails for lack of a second, and so the existing Finance Committee recommendation stands.
Got it.
Okay to shift gears to Centennial?
Yes.
Okay. So we can give a quick overview. The memo is in the packet, and then open it up for questions or discussion. Guilford, do you want to give the brief overview of the bid process and what sort of what's going on?
So we've been working on this project for quite a while, if you remember. We started pre-bid, we did pre-bids for our filed sub bids a while back. At the point we did the filed sub bids, we were actually told we were awarded a state revolving fund grant, which was really nice for the town of Amherst. And Sean will talk more about that. That gives us a loan at the end of 1.5%, and then gives us a loan forgiveness, which is, if we approve the new amount, is about $4 million. So that's what we get out of the SRF. But when we got the SF loan, we had to slow down. We had to repackage things. We just went out to bid 2 weeks ago. We opened bids, final prime contractor bids, and we got the number we got, which is roughly $18 million, a little over. So that actually brings us to a total project cost around $21 million, $300,000. So we rounded that to $21.5 million is what we're requesting right now. It's amazing how you get asked to talk and all your notes get buried somewhere and you're trying to find them quickly and it doesn't work. But that's briefly what's going on. We do have all of our bids in. We do have a project price locked in. We're required to have a contingency in that project with the SRF fund. So there's a 5% contingency built into the 21.5 million. We do get our SRF loan increase. They will cover the entire construction cost. And our loan, like I said, our loan forgiveness does increase. It increases about $4 million. So all we need to do now is appropriate the additional funds, and then we can move forward with awarding the contract and hopefully start construction or deconstruction, demolition of the existing facility in April or May.
So the specific action being proposed in front of the Finance Committee is to rescind the previous debt authorization for $18 million and to authorize a new debt authorization for the total project cost, which is what the state revolving fund is requiring in order to move forward. And that is for the 21.5 million. And then in the memo at the very end, you'll see the estimated financial impact of based on the new authorization amount and the new assumptions related to the SRF and what they will fund. You can see the impact that's projected.
Okay, I see that Lynn is back. I want to let the minutes show that President has returned to the meeting. And Lynn, can you hear us? You want to confirm, unmute and just confirm?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank
And
you.
I'll fill you in if you don't know and what happened with the last item later.
I gave a really good response to your question that you didn't hear. But
So Kathy.
But it's tape, so I can listen to it.
Hey, I'm ready to support the motion to rescind, and I'm assuming you can put the wording that you just read out for Bill up on the board. I think it's important to move forward, so recommend to the council that we approve rescinding the previous authorization for 18 million and authorize new purchase for 21.5, and just put the language up so I didn't capture all the words.
I think that what was on in the order, what was in the memo is a specific order that has been prepared. Sean,
Okay.
do you have it, or do you want me to share screen?
I can share it real quick.
Okay, and I'm just going to speak to why I'm ready to move this, because it's a question I asked last night. There is money out there, and we just don't know what money there is right now between federal and other, and we, because we've got a shovel-ready project, we are more in a position to be in line to get some additional money for this if it turns out that some of it flows. There's federal infrastructure, there is state infrastructure. So I think moving this while we've got the bids in hand before the bidders say, whoops, I want to do a recalculation. Paul last night or Sean or Guilford said, these are hard bids. They're ready to do the work for this amount of money with the contingency, that I think it's important to move forward, because the difference between this year and last year is already huge. So I am strongly recommending, and I'm making a motion that we recommend the financial order FY 2309A as presented to the full committee, to the
There are
council.
two orders that are there, and I don't know
Okay,
if
so-
we need
so
to do
we-
a separate one. This
Can
one,
I bundle them together? Parliamentarians, I'm moving that we recommend that we rescind borrowing authorized but insured order FY 23-13-6, and we approve a new borrowing authorization, appropriation and borrowing authorization order FY 2309A. Can I do that in two parts, or do we have to take a vote on each?
You know, I think it would be better
Also-
do two, just because we provide this to our bond counsel when we get authorization, and I think
It's
just
all
having
held
it.
up
yeah.
two. So consider that amended. I'm first moving on the first one, and then I'm ready to make a motion on the second one.
so the motion that you're making is to, you're moving to rescind borrowing authorization.
That the finance committee recommend to the council.
Authorized, yes.
Yeah.
The
That we-
recommend of the council, that the council rescind borrowing authorized but unissued in order FY 23-13C. Is there a second?
Second, Devlin Gothier.
There's motion's been made and seconded. It's down on the floor. Bob Egner?
I just wanted to throw an idea out here, and it doesn't have anything to do with either of these motions, but if there's any chance that we could use some reserves in order to cover the cost of Centennial, I think it would be very important to try to minimize the impact on the rates. I know that we keep the enterprise fund separate from the general fund, but this is an unusual cost, and I don't think it has to be done right now. But I mean, I think over time, if there's a way we could reduce the impact by using reserves, I think we should try to do that.
Yeah, Kathy?
I believe we've got about 3 million that we haven't, so of ARPA that we haven't so far said. I know Paula and Sean probably have plans for it, but same question with what you just asked, Bob. Would ARPA can go for capital costs? So would this be something it could be used for, since it's clearly economic development? So
Can I respond quickly, Andy?
yeah, so yeah.
So it is something we're exploring. As everyone here knows, there are lots of initiatives in town, and so we're trying to use those ARPA funds to not do any new initiatives, but to help us achieve the initiatives that have already been identified out there. So I don't think there's nothing we can commit to at this point, but I'll just say it is something that we've discussed, is specifically with ARPA, potentially trying to find a way to see if we can offset some of the cost increase. But ultimately, we'll bring back a plan to the council, hopefully sometime in the next month or two, with more details about the plan for those funds. But just know that it is being discussed.
And are you aware of any funds in the federal level that are going to be available through the recently passed statute on infrastructure that we could seek?
So my understanding is that some of those funds that have gone through the state, they're flowing through the program that we are already in, that they're flowing through these loan programs, the state revolving fund program, to increase the amount of money that they have. So I haven't spoken with the individual that Guilford has spoken with, but one thing I do want to ask them is part of the reason why they're able to offer more favorable terms to us now, because of some of that federal funding that was approved. Because before those terms, we weren't offered this increase until recently.
That's correct. Massachusetts has decided to take most of their funds for water and wastewater type improvements and push it through the SRF program.
Okay. So we're back to where we were, that there's a motion on the floor that's been made and seconded, having to do with rescission of the prior authorization. And is there any further discussion on it? Because if not, then there's no reason not to proceed to a vote. If I go alphabetically, next in line to start is Lynn.
I'm present and I vote yes.
Okay. Bob?
I support.
Matt?
Support.
Bernie?
Support.
Okay, and I'm a yes. Alicia is absent. And Anna?
Yes.
So it's
Kathy's a yes also.
okay, Kathy's a yes. I'm sorry. Somehow I'm going alphabetical and get that miss. So, but thank you. So it's 4-0, 1 absent, and 3 supporting from non-voting members. Then we need to go on to the next order.
So I'll do it again, since I couldn't couple them. I move that we recommend to the town council appropriation and borrowing authorization order FY 23-09A.
Is there a second?
Second, Devlin Gothier.
Okay, so we have a motion again that is made by Anna, made by Kathy and seconded by Anna. And as was the prior. And motion is that the committee recommends to the council adoption of Order 2309A. Any discussion, further discussion on it? If not, go continuing on with what we've been doing before, then goes to Bob Hegner
I support.
and Matt Holloway,
Support.
Bernie Kubiak,
Support.
Kathy. Jim?
Yes, yes,
I'm a yes. Alicia again is absent. Anna
Yes.
and Lynn.
Aye.
So again, it's a same quota. 4-0, one member absent for the voting members and 3 resident members in support. So I think that that concludes the action, unless there were any other things that anybody from the committee wants to ask of our DPW staff while they're still here. And if not, thank you. Both.
thank you.
Feel free to.
Go get this built for us before the cost goes up again. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, so I think that the one thing that I wanted to just let you know about the minutes, because we have nothing to do on the minutes today. It turned out that we actually have approved all of the minutes for which I had received from Athena Word versions of minutes to review, so that when she had 5 additional dates on the agenda, I was missing the minutes that went with them. So as a consequence, I have nothing more to present to you for today. And we're essentially caught up with the ones that we have. And she was going to check into that, but she's it was identified the problem this morning, and she did not have time to find them right away. So it wasn't going to be helpful. So therefore, I have nothing more under the 48-hour rule. I don't know if anyone else does. If so, raise your hand. We know the date of the next meeting, which is the 21st of February at the same time. We know what the agenda items are because we've already talked about them. We're going to handle second part of the that exclusion, which is to recommend language, since we've already taken care of the date part of it. And but mostly it is to receive a presentation from the committee, from the CPA committee. The way that we have planned, and I just wanted to tell you that I really have done a lot of work with the help of Lynn and Sean to flesh out a pathway, a chart that actually shows all of the council meetings that deal with financial issues and all of the committee meetings through the end of June. And so at the next meeting, before the next meeting, I will be putting that in a form that I can present to you. I will, the other thing to note out of all of what I just said in that in that chart, the way that it is listed is that the action, the recommendations on CPA will be dealt with by the council on March 6th. It will be a public forum and vote. So on CPA. So but it's also a possibility to put it on the 20th of March. So that needs to be straightened out before we conclude, and that'll tell us when we need to actually handle it. That's why I haven't provided in writing, is there's still that one foggy piece in the this is on the council listing for 2 different dates. I don't know how to handle that, and so I was looking for guidance later. The other thing that I just wanted to mention, then I'll call in Kathy. The CPA, or excuse me, the audit is before the committee at the committee meeting of March 7th. So we are the audit committee according to the charge to the committee. And so the audit presentation will be on that date. Kathy?
It may be an amend to what you suggested for the next meeting. I think it's not just the language, but Lynn asked, and I think it's important we do it, that Sean do a reminder, a review of the reserve plan for the buildings. So just that we don't leave that question hanging. And Alicia asked, with some understanding caveats, if there are any potential anythings that the town might be able to do long-term for renters. And so if Paul, Sean, others are able to list, even though we can't promise it anything out there. So those were 2 requests that went with this. And I don't know whether they have to both be next time, but I think the reserve one does need to be next time. So I just wanted to say, I don't think we're just voting on language that we have actually no control over, because not only did you go and check what the town did last time, I just looked at 4 other towns today, and I looked at the state law. The words are written in stone with the word council or town, and the MSBA has to review this, and they require that. So we don't have what goes on the ballot discretion. We do have the ability to put an information sheet out, so people understand what those words mean. But we don't have a lot of discretion on it as a finance committee to say, gee, I wish we could add 3 more sentences to it. We can't. So Lynn, I was just trying to expand, what are we doing on the 21st? Because I think it's important we get that package done so the council can move on to it. And I'll stop.
I totally agree with you, Kathy. I would be surprised if we could change that language. The reality is the signs will say vote yes or vote no. And people need to understand what yes means and what no means. And that's the way you deal with this awkward language.
And just so people, at least what I saw last time was there was a primer someone put out. How much does this mean for you if you have a house of this value? It wasn't put in the ballot. It's not that people were unaware. It was out there in Q&As. And some people converted it to 4 cups of coffee a week, depending on where you buy it, or, to say it's, but and anyway, there wasn't an effort to say it's a mystery. So I just want to make sure we deal with the other things that we should, that are larger finance questions. And we're trying to get clarity from the MSBA for if we get something that they will have never seen before, a direct payment that's the equivalent of a tax credit to a non-tax paying thing. Do they offset their share at all? Or did they just consider that something extra? We've gotten some reading on the rebates, the Eversource rebates. They're not going to count that as a gift. They have some odd wording on it. But some of these things like PV, it's ineligible. They don't pay a dime of that. So that's outside their scope. But if we got a reading that, yeah, that's your money and we're not going to do it, we could at least report that back, so it's real money. And I'm trying to get a better sense. I know what the solar is, so I can it's pretty easy to multiply 30%. There's a little bit, it's less if it's a municipal bond that's tax-free. so it's a little bit less. What I don't know is geothermal, they say that. I don't know how much of the system they applied the 30 to. And so I'm just trying to find out what that is, because I have a range. So hopefully we at least have that information. It doesn't really affect the wording we put on the ballot at all, but it's information I think that's important for people to see. And it's on my net zero fact sheet. How much, I've been asked, how much extra does the HVAC system cost? Because we're going electric rather than gas. So I'm pulling that information together just in kind of a Q&A or a memo. So with that said, I'm just saying there's some pieces that, Lynn, I think would help when people are looking at this. That's it.
Great. Anything else that people have to say? Anyone has to say? If not, then I guess we're adjourned. And I appreciate it. It's been a difficult meeting, but appreciate all of the cooperation of all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Val. Have a good night.
Take care.